We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen. I'm a credentialed media member covering the NBA and the Suns at Dime Magazine as well as SB Nation. Follow me on Twitter at BrendonKleen14. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On PHX Suns. And it's Game 6 time. Joining us for the show is Jackson Frank. We're back on YouTube here on the Locked On NBA channel. Don't forget to subscribe there if you're listening and you're wanting to see us. But Game 6, Jackson, today. I guess I'm curious just what is on your mind. We haven't gotten to talk to you, I don't think, since the finals started. I think we previewed the series with you. So I guess a good question to ask would just be how this has felt to you compared to what you were expecting going in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't expect the Bucks to have this much success against Chris Paul. That would be the biggest thing I've been surprised by. And on the Bucks side, I didn't expect this many good Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton games to align. I mean, they've both kind of gotten better as the playoffs have kind of evolved. I mean, Holiday's been great defensively the entire time, but the scoring efficiency has really not been there. I think he's still working around a 50% true shooting on the whole entire playoff run. Middleton's been pretty good. I mean, he's obviously been a better offensive player than Jrue in this run, but they've had a lot of big games line up. Game 5, I think in Game 3 they were both very good. Chris was obviously quite good in Game 1, which was kind of the reason that game was even close to an extent. And so those would be the biggest things that have surprised me. But then, we'll talk more in depth about it. But I don't know if I thought, I maybe underestimated how important Deandre Ayton would be in this. Not underestimated, but like how much they would need him to play. And it seems like to an extent that's limiting him a little bit because he played 45 minutes in Game 5, career high. He's already played, I think, 40 plus minutes 6 times in these playoffs, which is like double what he did his entire career before that, including this year in the regular season. And so I think you're kind of seeing how much they need him and how much they need him on the floor, and maybe that's a hampering him a little bit because, quite frankly, he hasn't really been his playoff self for most of this series. Those are the things that have surprised me the most. I knew all those guys would be important, but I didn't really necessarily expect this to be the versions we got of them. I think if that all makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, some of it that I've been echoing to people listening is just 7-game series can sometimes suck. You know what I mean? The randomness of a situation in that few games means that you're going to get some weirdness. We're going to talk a ton about Deandre Ayton later. We'll also hit on the Suns' defense suffering when the offense gets sloppy. I think that's a big part of what happened in Game 5. And then we'll close out the show talking about size. The Bucks have a clear advantage there, something that I personally, to your point, Jackson, did not take into consideration as something that would really affect the series the way that it has. So we'll talk about that and maybe how the Suns can use their advantages rather than the games being played on Milwaukee's turf. Before we get any further, though, I wanted to let you guys know about right here on this here YouTube feed, Locked On NBA, NBA Draft GOAT Chad Ford, Locked On NBA Draft host Rafael Barlow, and Locked On NBA host John Corrales will be live this year covering the NBA Draft. It's Locked On NBA Draft 2021, brought to you by Built Bar. Get local expert analysis on each pick by following Locked On NBA, this YouTube channel right here, to watch our live coverage on July 29th, draft day at 7 p.m. Eastern. I don't think I actually introduced you all the way, Jackson, because I'm so used to having you on the show. His name is Jackson Frank. He's an NBA writer at Dime and the Analyst, hosts a podcast for Blue Wire about the Sixers. Again, previewed the series with us, so I thought it was a good time to check back in. But I had a question about the great Devin Booker debate of 2021, but I think we can skip it, Jackson, because the people know how I feel, and I don't really feel like talking about it. But turning defense into offense, I think, has been the Bucks' big recipe. I talked after Game 5 that they had a 189 offensive rating in transition in Game 5. That was by far the best of the series. Just absurd numbers. Better in the half court, too, to be fair, but they really, really killed the Suns. And that was despite a pretty not free game, but fewer giveaways by the Suns. And the Bucks were still able to make them pay 21 fast break points. And I thought a lot of the threes that they were able to make were not all like fast break, but were in rhythm in that semi-transition space, especially from Jrue Holiday, some of the spot-up threes from Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis. I think a lot of that goes away if you make them a half-court team, but I also think if it were that simple, we probably would have seen it, Jackson. So why do you think it's been so hard for the Suns to turn Milwaukee into the half-court team? Because that's been the conversation all series long, and yet here we are heading into Game 6. There hasn't really been a game where the Suns have been able to effectively do that.
Yeah, I think what the Bucks have done really well is they're capitalizing on transition opportunities, of course, because they have, probably the league's preeminent transition player in Giannis. At times, you mentioned, like, I thought one of the reasons the Suns quickly blew that 16-point lead was because the Bucks have, as they've done throughout these playoffs a lot, is kind of they've done a great job of leaking out. Because they're switching a lot and they're having guys contest threes. That whoever that is, when a big man's out there, whether it's Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Giannis, they're just leaking out from misses. They're not really crashing the glass. They're trusting other guys to gain rebound, and then they're looking up ahead for outlet passes. Drew Holiday, I think, and Chris Middleton did a great job of pushing the pace. Memphis a facilitator, at least in Game 5. Chris, more of a little early offense scorer. Drew's had his times in this series throughout the playoffs where I think he's hurried some shots, but I thought in Game 5 he was really good about trying to get ball up the floor rather than taking those hurried threes. It's kind of been a staple of his questionable decision making at times. But that's what stood out to me the most is, like, the Suns just don't really have an on ball defender that really kind of confronts you in the way that Drew Holiday. Like, Mikal is great, but I know there's always been talk about, like, he could be a little more aggressive. Like, I thought he was really good to start Game 5 because he was all up in Chris Middleton's grill and he was fighting over screens and making things tough. But that's not always his MO, right? Whereas the Bucks have that guy in Drew Holiday who was basically just meeting Chris Paul whenever he touches the ball initially, and that's hurting their early offense. They were better about it in Game 5 with getting Chris Paul early touches in space, but the Suns don't have that guy, and especially don't have someone to stop Giannis on the break, and so that's making things really tough. So it's a combination of factors, but largely I think it's been tied to Milwaukee's emphasis to really push the ball, especially in Game 5, or leak out and exploit that size advantage that you mentioned, because they're always going to have a size advantage, I think, in this series, whether it's during non-8 minutes, of course they will, or if it's during kind of the starting 5 minutes because they have Brook Lopez and Giannis out there. I know they've gone small to close, I think, every game in this series. I want to say, I know Brook played some clutch minutes in Game 5. Like, he was out there, I think, 5 minutes to go. But
he's basically been the backup center in the past 2 games, right? I mean, he starts, but Giannis is the center, and Brook plays with the bench a lot of the time. So you're right.
But they still have. I mean, they're going Portis a lot. Like, they still throw out some really big. I mean, they play a lineup. I think they've played somewhere it's Portis and Giannis, and then it's Drew and Chris, and then it's Pat, and it's like the smallest dude out there is Drew Holiday, who's 6'3" with a 6'7" wingspan.
Well, they had a lineup in the last game where Chris was the smallest guy. I mean, it was for like a 30-second little stretch while somebody was at the scorers table, but it's like that was just, to me, it's like, damn,
they're just huge and mobile, and they have guys who can dribble, and that is a very useful thing.
Well, the thing, I mean, this is almost a tangent, but the thing I've always felt like about the NBA that got lost in, like, the small ball conversation is, like, you have to be able to play versatilely without losing size. It's not that you're downsizing just because that looks better and you want to look like the Warriors physically. You do it if you have the horses to play a bigger team while being more versatile than they are and having the ball handling and shooting that you talked about. And lineups like those are the ones where the Bucks really show that they have that. And you really feel that size in transition, like you were saying. And they were able to control the pace, I think, a lot because of they are pushing even off of makes, because a couple of those turnovers were dead ball. The Suns, I think, had 8 or 9 turnovers, and a couple of them didn't even lead to transition opportunities. They led to out of bounds plays. So it's really like 6 or 7 that you're talking about, and they were still able to get out because they were running at any possible moment that they could, and bad misses from 3, just different opportunities. And then you combine that with Drew Holiday basically stalking Chris Paul, and it feels like every single minute of the game, the Bucks are in control of how the game is being played. I think obviously a lot of that changes in the half court, because really the size thing, the only way you feel that so much in the half court is the rebounding, which the Suns are devoting a lot of resources to. I'll talk about that when we get to Ayton, but it's not as much of a concern. And then in Game 5, they actually were pretty even on the glass. So they've figured out a solution there, and I think the half court is obviously the Suns' benefit. And the ways that I think they can get better on offense to make it so that the defense doesn't have to carry them or make up for the mistakes is less of those bad threes. Torrey Craig and Jay Crowder and Chris Paul leading to those shots in that second quarter stretch that we've all talked so much about. That was a big culprit. One pass shots, early clock threes. I had some fans getting on Crowder. They had an inbounds play where Crowder got a three on the wing with 13 seconds left on the clock that was way contested, hit right off the front of the basket. Horrible, right? And I think within that, there's like the more or less campaign debate. I think more campaign, maybe not minutes-wise, but at least if he's on the floor, using what makes him good, using him to push the pace to get into the paint. People think he's been bad. I think he's been less good than he was against the Clippers or different
And he's been
moments.
better in the second half of this series. Like first 2 or 3 games, he was tough, but I think in one of their first losses of this series, he kind of turned the corner, was better. But yeah, I absolutely agree. They can't afford those minutes where they only have one creator on the floor. Like it's got to be 2 of Booker, Paul, and Payne out there at all times. I think in game 5, because I wrote about this, I wrote a kind of a reflection piece of game 5 and look at the game 6. And I wrote about this over at the Analyst. I think they had only Paul out there for 4.5 minutes, I think which that stretch in the second quarter, and they were minus 10 in those minutes, in 4.5 minutes, which is awful because Payne is Payne's inconsistent, but they just need more half court creation, and for all campaign's faults, he can dribble and he can get to the rim and he can shoot off the bounce. Like it's not always going to be pretty. Like maybe you have a game where he goes 2 of 9 in 23 minutes, but you need something to kind of like have a ripple effect in the defense, and that's where I think Chris Paul's really been limited. And like you mentioned, those hurried threes, like there was a couple of them that were fine. It was like a wide open 3, you miss them. Like that's what when you shoot that well in the first quarter, is what's going to happen. They still shot 13 of 19 from 3, but when you're rushing those shots, and then as I mentioned, the Bucks are leaking out, and you're playing Torrey Craig at the 5, and it's really like they lost the Giannis minutes by like 14 points or something in like 5 minutes. You can't have that happen. Like I know Ayton was out and Booker was out, but I mean that's what killed them. I mean, you could talk about other things, but when you sacrifice a 16-point lead in 5 minutes, and when the best player in the series, who's dominated the entire series, isn't playing, that's where you lose. Like you can talk about other things. There are factors that contribute because the context of the game makes it seem like it's more important. But the Devin Booker turnover with 25 seconds to go doesn't matter if they don't sacrifice a 16-point lead in a snap of a finger.
Yeah, and a lot of that, again, to return to the crux of this, happened because I think the pace got away from what the Suns wanted. And I don't want to get things misconstrued, because we know the Suns can excel in transition, but the reason we're focused so much on Paul and Payne within that is that if they're not going to let Payne do his thing, and if he's not feeling comfortable, and Chris Paul, his advantage creation is kind of limited, well, those advantages that the Suns tend to have in transition are gone. And I think just in this series in general, they're not really as much of a strength as they were against maybe the Lakers or the Nuggets. So it's just about trying to adjust and play to your strengths, which is what I do want to close the show on. But one guy who has to be better for them to be better as a team in the half court is Deandre Ayton. So we'll talk about him in just a second. First, though, folks, a quick word from Rock Auto, the first sponsor of today's show. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's pretty hard to just walk into your dealership that happens to be the maker of your car and expect that they're going to get you what you need for a reasonable price. You're not going to be buying in bulk, so you're not going to get a cheap price. You don't necessarily know if the part is even right. You really just walk in there and you're kind of at the whim of the dealership or even the chain store. They're not much better. Rock Auto changes all of that. They've been doing this online, easy, cheap for you for 20 years. Don't even need an account to make a purchase. You just log in, type in the name of your car, head to the landing page, especially for you. Scroll down to what you need, click purchase, and it's at your door in days. Again, no account required. Save 30, 50, even 100% compared to, again, the dealership or chain store. I purchased a Rock Auto, I've told you this before, sun visor, because unfortunately, those of you who live in the Valley know that those things just crack right off in the sun. And it was that easy. I just typed in Hyundai Elantra, scrolled down, click, cheap price as I knew it would be, and it was at my door. Just went right on. Easy as that. So go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, and when you make your purchase, write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, on to DeAndre Ayton. I have to kind of frame it this way because it's how I've been thinking about it, and I think it's how a lot of the conversation around Ayton has been framed, Jackson, coming off of his incredible Western Conference Finals, is just where did that guy go? So I know it's not that simple. I know the series and the matchup has a lot to do with it, but I kind of just want to open it up there and give the floor to you of why do you think we haven't seen the dominant DeAndre Ayton we saw in the Western Conference Finals, and do you think he can make a reappearance here in the next 2 games?
Well, I'll lead off with saying I think he can, because I don't want to write off like what Ayton has done in the second half of the season and extended in the playoffs has been really. I mean, he's just transformed the way he plays to an extent, and you saw flashes of it. But I don't want to write him off because he's been so impressive. But it is a little tough to think you're going to get back to the Ayton we've seen at the peaks of this playoff run, because I think aside from I want to say either game 4, one of the games, game 3 or 4. Or maybe game 2. Everything just kind of blends in. One game, I think he's been poor defensively with some missed rotations. But besides that, he's doing all he can against Giannis. Like, he's had some really good possessions where he forces Giannis to pass. I don't think he was bad defensively in game 5. Giannis just decided to hit a bunch of jumpers he doesn't normally hit. Like, if you're looking at the optimistic lens for the Suns to an extent, generally speaking, it's that Middleton, Drew, and Giannis are not going to put up that shot-making performance again.
No.
Now, the counter is the Suns aren't going to go 13-19, and Booker's not going to give you Booker.
I think Booker could do that. I'm going
to say you don't want to rely on it, right? You don't want to rely on him giving you another 40 piece. But anyhow, I think that so Ayton's been good defensively for the most part in the series. Like, he is clearly their best option to make Giannis a very, very good player, but not the dominant one as a scorer that he's been in this series. And when Giannis is a dominant scorer, it's really tough because he's obviously going to do what he does defensively in transition, and the level he's passing out in this series has been superb the last few games. Yeah. But defensively, I think he's fine. Like, I'm not worried about him there. Like, he's had one game where I was pretty underwhelmed, but other than that, he's doing a good job against Giannis, doing what he can. Offensively, the Bucks have done a much better job later in this, basically since game 3 when he had foul trouble. Was that the one when he had like a really good start and then he played like
it was the one where he had the third quarter where he left and the Bucks made a big run, and it was the whole story. When
basically the coaching staff fouled him out. Like, he came out early in the fourth, he never came back in because it was a rout. But basically after the second, like the 8-minute mark of that second quarter, they've done a really good job of preventing advantageous switches that it just crushed this entire playoff run, and part of why he was so efficient in the regular season too down the stretch of the year. They're preventing more of those, but also he's going back to kind of his old ways at times. Like, he's not punishing getting deep steals as often. Like in game 4, he was like 3 of 9, I think, which is by far his worst scoring game of the playoffs. Missed a lot of bunnies where he didn't go up with power and finesse. He went up with finesse instead of power, and that's one of the evolutions he made this year. Is I think he was a much better at kind of stepping into finishes
in the playoffs, especially where I'm going to just smash the ball down. Like, this is what it is.
Just like an 85% shooter at the rim, which is what you should be given some of the quality of looks he gets. That's not to diminish it, but he's been really good there. I think. And he has great touch, but it feels like the release point is a little farther away. Like, usually he'll extend those 8 extra inches, whereas now it's a hook shot rather than a finger roll, right at the rim. And so those are the two. I think he just hasn't played with the same level of fierceness, maybe, or force.
Monty Williams' favorite word.
From that viral soundbite from game 2, I believe. And so that's the biggest thing is defensively not worried. Like, if Giannis hits those Dirk one-legged fadeaways over you, or a pull-up jumper from the top of the key like he did, it's like you tip your cap. Like, you want that from Giannis. But offensively, he's got to be better about, like he had Pat Connaughton. There was a play in the fourth. I think Booker ended up scoring, driving past Giannis, but he had Pat Connaughton on him, and he just kind of let Pat front him and push him off the block. And eventually Ayton realized Booker wanted to drive, and so he got out of the way smartly. But and then he had a play in the third quarter where Drew Holiday, is a very good post defender, but you can't be letting Drew Holiday get lower than you and force you away from what you want to do. Like, you just can't have that happen. And so those are a couple of things that stood out. And then in game 4, as I said, just a lot of misses around the rim that he should finish. So in conjunction with the Bucks limiting him, I think that's made it tougher. And then I think also, I think he's gotten a lot better as a screener, but I think he could still improve. I think he's been so good about wanting to slip screens because they played so many switch heavy defenses that at times he's kind of not making contact, and the Bucks or the Suns offense really could use kind of more advantage creation via screens. Like, Booker is just having to make every tough bucket, but that's my vantage point on it. And I do think he can get better in some ways, but the Bucks also have done some really nice things defensively. But some of it is on Ayton for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so just the numbers, he's shooting 68% in the postseason. It's 58% in the finals. It's like, it's good enough, right? And it's 16 points down to 15 points. I think the big, if I was just kind of scanning through the stats, like the box score stats to kind of see like, where is it really showing up? 27 offensive rebounds in 6 games against the Clippers, 12 through 5 games against the Bucks. That to me, it doesn't tell the whole story, but they could really use those because they're losing that possession game in so many of these games. Better in game 5, and I think trending in the right direction with some of the fixes that they've made, but that does to me exemplify some of what it is. I think I'm a little bit lower than you on the pick and roll defense because I agree, like his when he just has to kind of corral Giannis, which again, not to make light of that, it's pretty ridiculously hard to do, but I think that's been good and probably the part of the defense we expected him to be able to handle if he could stay out of foul trouble, which has been the case except for that one game. The pick and roll defense in game 5, I was really critical of, and I think maybe I'm just seeing it because I've watched Ayton so much, but it goes in conjunction with some of the shot selection stuff you were talking about too. And maybe part of it is being tired, which you said at the very top of the show. But I mean, the shot selection, there was that shot in the fourth quarter late, the post jumper that had absolutely no chance. You could tell he was mad at himself the minute he put it up, but you just can't do it. It's like it's the NBA Finals. You can't take a shot like that. Similarly, the pick and roll, I think in that second quarter, he comes in game 5 after a couple minutes of the Bucks run. I think the lead was 8 when he checked in. You'd expect him to make a real difference. And I think it's so impossible in some ways because again, you're judging him based on a game where Holiday and Middleton made shots that you can't game plan for them making those shots. But once they are making them, Chris Paul's getting caught on screens, getting behind the play. And Ayton is sort of just in no man's land, allowing Holiday to get comfortable on pull-up threes. And that to me was another thing. And it's going to get to my bigger point later on about adjustments, but that to me is where I started to see his energy and effort wane a little bit, his like locked inness of, okay, I need to figure out a different thing here because what I'm doing is not working. Giannis, as you said, still not in the game at that point either, so he doesn't have that to worry about. A few fixes, though, to be a little bit on the positive. Those quick proactive adjustments, hand in the face of shooters if there's hotness going on, which is what Monty Williams called it after the game, of just identifying which shooter has it going, which shooters in the case of game 5 have it going, and doing something about that, not relying on your normal scheme or, oh, McHale's got it covered. And then I think another smaller one is being aware of whether Lopez is on the floor. Because I mentioned with the rebounding and some of the possession game stuff where they're selling out a lot on the glass, which is what they should have done to adjust from the Bucks handling that so well in games 3 and 4. But I think that there's opportunities. You talked about the seals, running the floor, rolling, screening. That's all easier if Brook Lopez isn't out there. It's doubly easy when Giannis isn't out there. So that awareness of like, when can I dominate the game? Those second quarters were Ayton's and the beginning of the fourth, all through the regular season. Those were like feasting time for DeAndre Ayton because Monty played him against subs. And if it's Bobby Portis and Giannis, or if Brook is out of position and happens to be guarding somebody else, if they can get a switch, Ayton needs to be aware of, okay, now it's my time. And he did that so much in the Western Conference Finals. So I don't want to pile on Ayton, but I think the Suns were great in the regular season, and they're here, nominally because Booker and Paul are such incredible offensive engines for this team, and their defense is versatile and all the things we love about the Suns. The reason that they've overperformed in the playoffs to me, though, is because of Ayton, because he took that jump. And you said that similar point at the top of this segment, and I just feel like you're probably right that he's not going to be that guy, but I think he has to just wield his advantages. It's the, I guess, sort of theme of this show in order for the Suns to be able to kind of get over that hump. I wish we had more time on Ayton, but we have to get to the next segment. So we'll get to more on the Bucks' size, the underestimation on my part, and how the Suns can maybe take back control of how the game is being played. First, though, a quick word from our friends at betonline.ag. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest bet on all of your favorite sports, whether that is the MLB heading toward the stretch run. Get your mind off the Diamondbacks, bet on a team that's actually going to win some games, or just really hammer the Diamondbacks getting crushed. Maybe that makes you feel better. We also have the NBA obviously winding down, but the draft not too far around the corner. Draft props are always fun because you can, unfortunately, capitalize on guys who fall, or you really feel like you have the sleeper, you can bet on that as well. All of it is at Bet Online. Sporting news, sign-up bonuses, contest info constantly updated, so do not sit on the sidelines. Get in on the action as teams prep for their run to the playoffs. So before the next pitch, head over to Bet Online on the web or on your mobile device. Make an account today, and when you make your first deposit, use the promo code LOCKEDON to get a 50% welcome bonus. That's promo code LOCKEDON at Bet Online to get a 50% welcome bonus straight to your account. Bet Online, your online sportsbook experts. Okay, closing out the show, Jackson. Let's sit on the Bucks' size a little bit more and then try to figure out how the Suns can use their own strengths to their advantage a little bit more. I'll give you the floor. How do you think that size is most notably causing problems? Because we can just look at the lineups and say, okay, that guy's bigger than that guy on down the line. But the Bucks I just feel like they're kind of unlocking something as far as how to actually use that to their advantage in this series compared to what they were doing in the past.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, there's the offensive glass. I mean, I think you can. I think Milwaukee's offensive rebounding rate has been like, just looking at cleaning the glass, which classifies it for percentiles among all playoff games. It's been, I want to say, I was looking at it yesterday when I was doing some writing. Like, I want to say it's been at least in the 60th or 70th percentile every game of this series. Like, no, yeah. I want to say the lowest rate they've had, like 28%. It's hovered around 32, 35 during the wins, which is a ridiculous rate to
still good. Yeah.
Yeah. But so I think that's an obvious way. You can look at when the Suns tried to hide Chris Paul and PJ Tucker in game 4, I believe, was the big one. PJ Tucker just crushed him a lot. He's even had given Devin Booker some issues because they're just a lot stronger of a team too. Like, it's not just the size; it's that Drew Holiday is. I mean, he bullied Chris Paul for some buckets in Game 5. Chris Middleton isn't a super strong guy, but he's fairly physical when he gets to his spots and posting up.
And that's the McHale thing you were talking about too. You were saying McHale that it's the strength, and we've known that forever. But in this series, I think it's playing a role.
So that's one. I mean, Middleton really got to his spots against CP. Those a bunch of tough turnaround fadeaways in Game 5. PJ Tucker is obviously a certified strongman, doing his thing on the offensive glass. He's been. I think he's been good defensively. He hasn't always resulted in impact, but he's been good. Giannis is Giannis. Brooke is kind of that same way. Really, the real only enforcers are Craig and Crowder. Then Booker's pretty strong and physical, but you don't want to rely on Booker to really set the tone defensively, even though I think Booker was pretty good defensively, honestly, in Game 5. Like, I don't think by any means, like, he's been up and down in this series, I think, defensively, and even kind of in the last series, but he was good in Game 5, I thought, kind of given the standard he's set for himself as a defender the last couple of years. So that's the biggest thing. It's not just size, it's strength. It's just the physicality they play with. Like, and a lot of it defensively, like, the Suns are so good, and why they've been so good offensively is they take those little pockets of space that the defense usually grants you because you just run one way and they let you get to that spot. And the Bucks basically just say, no, you're not going to get there. You're not going to set that screen as physically. You're not going to get those 3 extra inches. Drew Holiday saying, no, Chris Paul, you're not going to get into those early double drags, those early offense pick and rolls. Like, that's not going to happen. PJ Tucker is, doing his thing, fighting around screens, giving Devin Booker all he can handle. And Booker's countering by just hitting ridiculous shot to his credit. There's been times where Ayton's, mentioned the offensive glass. Ayton's been punked a few times on the glass, whether it's Portis or Giannis or Brook Lopez. Lopez less so. I think he's kind of been perimeter oriented in this series more than the last couple of rounds for the Bucks. But that's the biggest. And I basically just list a lot of different facets, but it is manifesting in a lot of different ways because the Suns' offense was not an issue in Game 5. Like, that wasn't a really issue, but it was really bad in Game 4, and I think it was bad in Game 3 as well. If I recall, I want to say they got blown out as like 120.
They do all blend together. I completely sympathize, especially covering the same team for 4 rounds, and you're like, that was Game 3 of round 2, and it's a nightmare.
But yeah, Game 4 was definitely bad. Booker still went off, so they're just not getting I would tie it back. People are talking, oh, you can't, like, there's been discussion like, what's up with the Suns offense? Like, giving the ball to Devin Booker is not going to work, but they have to do that because the way, like, this motion heavy, ball movement heavy, 3 heavy offense that the Suns run isn't working because Chris Paul can barely do anything, and he's the guy who was Booker's improved a tons of pass rate manipulation these days. When he kind of puts his mind to it, is incredible. But Paul is the guy who kind of, I think, typically makes everyone around him kind of get in rhythm. That's not at all to discredit Booker. Like, that's why they work so well, because Booker is a guy who can get his bucket, can also create for others. But the Bucks are just not allowing that. They're not allowing Jay Crowder's been on fire from three. They're not allowing Mikal to have big games. Ayton to have, like, they're not allowing all the role players to have a big game at once. And that's what
it's
the
not
biggest issue.
It's not dissimilar to me and Mike Prater's been on this with Booker on Twitter, and I wish he would write about it. I tell him all the time he should write more about the Suns because I like to read it. But just doing the work early defensively, right? Patrick Beverley did that in the Clippers series, and it changed that series because it's not that Holiday is just like mugging Chris Paul at half court, although he has stripped him a few times. It's that he is just bumping him, getting him out of the spots, slowing the set down. The Suns are so reliant on just efficient, crisp basketball that when you mess with their timing or just get in their body, make it so that all that stuff's not as smooth, it just is a ripple effect that leads to, oh, that pass isn't there like it usually is. I thought for Booker that the strip against Holiday was so the strip by Holiday that led to that alley-oop at the very end of the game was so evident of Booker's. It's like we're piling on because it's game 6 of the NBA Finals. Booker is a great passer, but it was evidentiary of what Booker, where he is limited as a passer, which is, it's very easy for me to say, but we've watched great players, we've watched great passers. Those guys know that rotation is going to come and that Chris Paul is going to be open for a three. Holiday helped off of Chris Paul. Like, that guy can make a spot up three, right? And so it's just little moments like that where you see, okay, Chris as the engine in that type of a situation. And maybe it's always going to be Book in a we need a point type of moment. But Chris Paul, possession after possession, is going to be able to find that stuff. So I agree, it's not quite as easy as, oh, well, Book should just look to pass more. Okay, well, he's not as good at that. What he's good at is doing what he did, and he did it at an elite level. So they need the other stuff to work. It's not about Booker making the wrong decision, in my opinion. It's more about the other stuff. That's where campaign comes into me. And that's where Booker, maybe I talked about this leading in, and I think they've done it a little bit more into the past couple of games, is Booker initiating more and then having Chris Paul be more of a second side initiator. I think that helps for his health as well as just mixing things up from an offensive standpoint. But you're right. I think the strength, like functional strength, that goes back to what I was saying about the small ball. It's one of the reasons, again, as a little bit of a tangent, that I love those 2019 Raptors so much, is they were able to play small without it feeling like they were necessarily always playing small, because they had functional strength at every size. I know they had Marc Gasol, who's nobody's idea of small, but they are so versatile and they make you feel them. The Bucks have that feeling, which is a little bit silly that they were obviously beaten by that team and now are looking a lot like them. But it does feel like that, where you're just unable to do what feels natural to you because of how physical and strong that they are.
I do want to add, the one thing I wanted to add is I interpret the Booker turnover late less so about his broad ability as a passer and more so about the fact that, like, the Bucks have made everything so tough on everyone else in the series that, like, the best option was for him to probably try and get off a fadeaway over PJ Tucker and Giannis and Drew. Like yes, Chris Paul can hit spot up threes, but he's also a guy who, like, is a little apprehensive on those, right? Like, he's not always a willing bet to, like, just let it fly. So that's how I viewed it. But I get, generally speaking, Booker can get tunnel vision times, but that play specifically to me was like the best option for the Suns for the last 2 games has just been Booker go cook, and even if it had to be over 3 guys, that's how I viewed that. But
I like how Nick Nurse put it on the low post. He said he just took a couple dribbles too many. And, like, that might really be as simple as what it is like the shots there. If you were at, the 16-foot point, he got to 13 feet and that was too late.
And Giannis was too close. But yeah, I think that's the thing about this offense. It's like this, like, and that's what, like, I don't the Suns, because I don't want to get on the whole Devin Booker conversation, but the Suns the Suns aren't choosing to run things through Devin Booker instead of Chris Paul. Like, they're a team, if you've watched them all year and you've said to them, like, Monty Williams is so much of a trust in the way you've done things. Like, they didn't just decide halfway through the series that, let's let Devin Booker be kind of the thing that stirs our drink, or rather than Chris Paul, right? Like, that they are forced to do it because Chris Paul can't create effectively in the half court. Like, that's what they're like. So yeah, sure, it'd be great. They should try and win with what's worked, but what's worked is no longer working. Like, it's not just Monty Williams mid-series going, let's change it up for the sake of it because Booker has it rolling. Like, they've been forced to. So and they've been forced to because of the strength that we talked about of the Bucks.
Yeah, and that's been the biggest thing to me that's bothered me. And it doesn't really matter what other people think. They're entitled to their own opinion. Look, one of them who's on this bandwagon worked for the Bucks front office, so he knows more about basketball than me. But it's just like, I don't quite understand putting the blame on Booker. It feels like a stripping of context that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And especially, like, I've seen a lot of Suns fans getting hurt by that, because it's like, it starts to feel like you're relying on, whether you want to do the data term of your priors or whatever you want to say, of like, Booker is a shot first guy. Booker is a losing player. Whatever thing you thought about Booker, it's like, are we really going back to that conversation after 2 40-point games? I don't really agree, obviously.
But I would just say, maybe it's not even blaming Booker so much. Yes, it's true. The Suns would be better suited if they could do what's worked, but that's not really. You can't really, like. I'm not disrespecting anyone specifically, but you can't just. That's not analysis at this point to say the Suns should do what's worked, because they're like, it doesn't work anymore. Like, they should let.
They would have swept like they did it for 2 games and then it stopped working, and now they lost 3.
So yes, it is not incorrect to say that, like, Booker having this large of a usage is probably not the best way to run offense, even if it worked in Game 5. But what is incorrect is to say go back to Chris Paul running things, because that's not really an option at this point. You saw that you tried that in Game 4 and the offense was terrible, and you had to go to Devin Booker to try and save you. So I feel like we got into the tangent we didn't want to, but I think it was important.
No, it's what everybody's talking about. It's totally fair.
Nuance is important here. That yes, they're not at their best offensively if Booker has that big of a load, but you can't blame Booker for that, because he is the only one that's really giving them consistent production right now, and because of everything the Bucks have taken away. Because of if the Suns could do what's always worked, they would. Monty is a guy. They're not just tinkering for the sake of it. They're not just changing things. That's not been their MO at all this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so jarring, because I think what makes people love this Suns team is that when they, like, that Nuggets series, I mean, when they are, like, really going, they really do feel unbeatable. I think I had a show with you during that Nuggets series, and the title of the episode was, "Are the Suns Unguardable?" And it really feels that way when it's working. So I feel like people watch that and they're like, do that again. It worked. It's like, well, yeah, but the Bucks are really, really good, and they are a particularly crappy matchup for the Suns. And I think they've really unlocked something with Giannis at center, which sounds obvious, but playing a traditional type of their normal defense, but with Giannis at center instead of, Giannis at the 4, PJ Tucker being a huge part of why they've been able to do that, even without DiVincenzo. That has really hurt the Suns. That said, I do think, like, Ayton doing some of the things we talked about, you pray that Chris can just continue to feel a little bit more comfortable. I think he looked better in Game 5 than he did in Game 4. That's optimistic. And then Cameron Payne, if he can continue to kind of trend in the right direction. And I think, to me, it's like, to get back to the rebounding thing, and then we can close out, is they are rightly selling out a lot on the glass. And part of that is, again, these awareness of, like, who's on the floor. I think that's, to me, a lot of where the Bucks have been able to really punish is the Bucks seem to be able to, within the players, adjust on the fly better than the Suns have. People want to make that always about coaching. I think a lot of that, to me, is adjusting within who's on the floor, what's your role, what's your job, what's working, what's not working. The Suns are doing that with the offensive rebounding and selling out to protect against that, and being aware of all these different things. But when it comes to just playing their style, playing the game on their turf, I think that a lot of what I think about too is just the shooters need to shoot. And I know I'm criticizing in the second quarter taking too quick of a trigger, but I feel like there's a lot of stretches where the Suns just they overreact to what's not working in a way that is frustrating. And I've seen some Suns fans saying, like, are we going to break? Is the Bucks, is it just too much for us? And I don't think I don't really like to think about things in those terms, but, like, I do think those are some of the areas where you start to see, like, the Bucks just seem to be playing smarter of the 5 dudes on the court than the Suns are, and able to kind of adjust on the fly like that, able to stick to what they know will win them the game in a way that the Suns haven't been able to do. A lot of it comes back to Chris Paul. A lot of it comes back to just this bad matchup. But I do think that there is a certain element of, like, the Suns might not be able to get quite as easy back to what they had been doing in the past, but I do think just sticking to that and reading and reacting to what's working and what's not can go a long way. I feel like you get this far in a series and you start to have points on either side of the same argument. So I think that's a good sign that we should wrap up as I knock my microphone down as well. Jackson, any last thoughts for us before we close out?
Yeah, I would just would note about Chris Paul is like the defense was a way bigger issue than the offense in Game 5. Yeah, he had some long stretches offensively where he was kind of quiet, but what was pretty dang good. He was a big reason that they got off to a great start in first quarter, and then was part of the reason they nearly stole that win. I mean, it's some big shots. Had the late they were in that little ATO for a little clear out where they ran a decoy action. And he just drove around Pat Connaughton for a rare finish at the rim from him. It's like, yeah, you'd like to see him beat Chris Paul, but I think all things considered, if you can get a better defensive game from him, you'll take what you saw offensively. Yeah, he had some sloppy plays offensively, but you'll take 21 and 11. I know and I wrote in a piece that that overstated his ability in Game 5 offensively, but you'll take that if you can get better defense from him. But yeah, I tend to agree. As I've been writing these pieces after every game now, it's I feel like I'm talking in circles at times about what the key is for each team.
But I think to your point within that, you were saying PJ really dominated Paul on the glass in that one game. I think that's what I would like to see more of that. You live with,
right? Because
they've been putting Booker on Tucker, and I think Booker's just a better defender than Paul. And so to me, it's I liked what we saw from Booker on Middleton. I liked what we saw from Bridges on Holiday. They're switching so much that who's guarding who doesn't always really matter. But I think you need to worry about protecting Paul more than you need to worry about protecting Booker. And so hopefully we see that from the jump in the next game. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's so much on both sides.
Yeah, especially these last three where it's been the Bucks winning every single one. I feel like I'm just repurposing my analysis about what the Bucks are doing well and what the Suns aren't. But yeah, I totally agree about the Paul thing. And I mentioned that in my article that I'll live with if Pat Connaughton and PJ Tucker is getting offensive rebounds and Middleton or Drew or Giannis is scoring over your three best defenders, yeah, you'll take that. Rather than right now, Chris Paul is probably I think Chris Paul, who he was in Game 5, was the worst defender among the five starters. I don't think generally speaking he's a worse defender than Booker in certain contexts, but in Game 5 he absolutely was. But someone else still has to score, right? Tucker and Connaughton aren't really going to take a lot of shots around the rim. They're not like the Giannis, Deandre Ayton offensive rebounding guys where they're putting the ball back up. So that's where I would go and just try and don't allow those switches as much because Middleton's just going to lick his chops at those when he gets CT on them. And like I said, and you mentioned Booker was pretty dang good, I think, at times against Middleton and
Booker. If all Booker has to do is just guard his man for 10 seconds, it's going to be fine. You're going to be okay.
Yeah, he's physical and he moves well. He knows how to play in ISO defense. So,
and that's always been true, even when he was a bad defender. Most guys in the NBA can do that. But okay, I think that'll close us off, guys. Enjoy Game 6. Again, as I've been reminding you as I close out every single show, these are supposed to be fun. I know it sucks when they lose, but this is a team that this time of year for the past 10 years, all we've been talking about is what the lottery ping pong balls are going to do and, what's coming up in the draft. So this is all gravy, as I said last time, and I hope you find a way to enjoy it. We'll be back with you, of course, every step of the way, including after Game 6. So come right back here after the final buzzer, back on YouTube, back wherever you listen to podcasts with Brendon Duenas, a.k.a. Zona. So look forward to that and enjoy your Tuesday.